Hi guys, welcome to Universal Recovery every Tuesday. As always, I'm Saf and of course TJ, and this is our show where we talk about addiction, mental health, trauma, and recovery in general. We are spirituality gone wild. This is Universal Recovery, and we're here to serve. How's your week been, TJ? How you been this week?
My week has been great. I'm really excited that we have a special guest today, one of my favorite people to talk with, Jeremy Miller. So that's going to be fun. And, I think the longer I'm on planet Earth, the more I realize that it's a moment-to-moment choice how we view the world. So I'm always viewing the world as wonderful and myself as having an incredible experience, regardless of what's happening. So it's been an awesome week. How's that? That was a long answer, but I'm doing great.
That's what we want to hear. It's been a great week for me as well. And you know what? Sometimes just getting up. I mean, it's snowing here in the UK, by the way. And snow for us is hardly snow in some parts of the US, but it's so beautiful. Just looking at it and just going out. And I went for a walk last Friday and just doing the things that we take for granted. It makes such a great difference, especially with this COVID and everything else that's been going on in the last year. So yeah, you mentioned we've got a great guest today. Jeremy, do you want to introduce Jeremy to us before we bring him on? I know he's waiting impatiently or patiently, bless him, in the waiting room, but would you like to introduce him, TJ, as you know?
Oh, absolutely. I've had the honor of working with Jeremy Miller for a few years now, and he is part of the Conscious Recovery team and does so much more than his title, which is Chief Marketing Officer. He does so much more, and he's one of my favorite people to be in conversation with, and we really share a passion for being a part of shifting the current treatment paradigm into a more wholeness-centered approach. So I think that's what I'm going to say. He, of course, can tell us more, but from the moment I met him, I think the conversation just sparked immediately, and the conversation's continuing. So I'm grateful for him.
And here he is, Jeremy Miller in the house.
Hey, fellas. Thank you so much for having me, Saf. TJ, as always, I'm super excited to be in conversation with you both.
It's great. It's great to have you. I mean, this is the first time we've actually spoken together face to face, albeit over StreamYard. But it's like I know you already because obviously I'm doing the conscious recovery courses and getting really involved. It's going slower than normal because life gets in the way, but I'm trying to complete it. But I see you on there and you and TJ together doing some wonderful work. And it's been a bit of pressure on me working with TJ because I've been trying to be at your level because the way you two work together is tremendous. So I feel blessed and to have you here, and obviously TJ knows you very, very well. But I don't know. I guess where we could start is how did you meet TJ and how did you get involved with conscious recovery and maybe a bit about your past really in addictions.
Yeah. Sure, Saf. Thank you. So TJ and I met a few years ago. Actually, a colleague introduced us, and at the time I was working at a residential treatment program in California that didn't employ the usual or traditional 12-step model. And so I've been in recovery now for 12 years, and I've long thought outside of the box, and a mutual colleague of ours introduced us, and she said, Jeremy, I love what you're doing, and I think you really need to meet TJ Woodward. And so we set up an appointment to get coffee together. And like TJ said, as soon as we met and we started talking about treatment and recovery, I got really excited because I had all these perspectives and opinions about treatment, and TJ had already developed an entire language and book around these concepts. And so he sent me Conscious Recovery in a PDF, actually, and I started reading it, and I couldn't stop. I was so excited because it was really what I was looking for so long, to infuse this new breath of life into what I consider to be somewhat of a stale model in treatment. And from there, we started collaborating a lot. We put together a conference that we did 2 years in a row. And the premise behind the conference was shifting the narrative of what treatment is and what it can be. And so the more we worked together, the more I realized that I was being pulled to support the industry as a whole, rather than be super singular in my efforts with just one treatment program. And so right before COVID hit, I decided to quit my full-time job and take this leap with TJ. And it's been a blast. I mean, it's been a wild ride, but what I see happening is this energy and this intensity and this vitality throughout our field around conscious recovery and the way it supports people in their treatment.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's important when you're going to get in this field. One, you've got to have some kind of passion, right? But it's just like myself as well. When I read Conscious Recovery, I also got the PDF. I'm still waiting for the hardback, but I don't know. Maybe TJ, it's my birthday in September. You never know. But also, when I read it, it was so refreshing, and it was different but not different. If that makes sense, it's. I mean, the similarities obviously is the recovery side of things, but the differences are the spiritual side of things and the physical side of things. I mean, TJ, when you were actually writing this, what was going through your mind at the time? Because obviously, shall we say we saw flaws in other modalities, or there were things that you thought that you could possibly bring forward that other modalities are not bringing? I mean, what was your mindset at that time?
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer that in two ways. I want to start by saying what Jeremy said with, him trusting his intuition to leave his full-time job. And it was literally 2 weeks, I think, before COVID hit. And we were both like, oh, okay. We do trust that intuition. And the reason I'm starting with that or sharing that is that I had a similar experience. I had been working in the addiction treatment field for close to a decade. And I had also been ministers of New Thought communities. I had started my own community. I was in the process of affiliating with Agape. And I was very clear that my path was through spiritual community. I did not want to write Conscious Recovery. My ego resisted it for a while. I would be in meditation and it would be this whisper, write a book about recovery, share your experience about recovery. And honestly, just to be transparent, I said, no, not me. I'm not going to be pigeonholed as a recovery guy. I had all these different reasons why I was saying to myself, no. Now, having said that, the reason that I wrote Conscious Recovery ultimately was that I was not only trusting that inner knowing, but I was also recognizing after working in the field for a decade that we were, and I'm going to be a little bit bold here, we were patting ourselves on the back for a 15% success rate in our field. And I want to just out of the gate, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I became curious about how we could start to move that needle. In other words, how do we serve people where they're at today in the 21st century and looking at a different approach? So I brought my experience through my education, through my personal experience in my recovery, and through being at that point well over 20 years of both in recovery and in New Thought. I got into recovery in '86, started doing New Thought in 1988, and I became curious about how to blend those two. And I had already been seeing incredible results in the work I was doing with clients. And so I kind of just gave in. And I'm saying this because it really was the experience. I kind of was like, no, I don't want to write that book. And then I finally said, okay, I know how to trust inner wisdom. I know to not be in my ego and to trust this spiritual side of myself. And then Conscious Recovery was born out of my experience of really two key points. One, how do we start to look at the person with addiction as through the lens of wholeness, as whole and complete, not as broken? And then the second piece is, how do we shift from only focusing on symptoms and behaviors and really start to heal the underlying root causes? So that's how it started. And I'm really incredibly grateful, as Jeremy said, that it started to really expand. We have a couple of very exciting announcements coming soon. And I'm extremely grateful.
That's great. I want to say hi to a few people. Some of our Our regulars, TJ, have joined us. Angel.
Hi, Angel.
Angel, welcome, Angel. Hi, Kimberly. Good to see you here on time today, my lovely. You're normally in traffic. Nicole. Hi, Nicole. Nicole Marie Campbell. And we have a guy that I met this week actually, or last week. I saw some of his stuff, TJ, and maybe it'd be good to have him as a guest in the future. I mean, I can't pronounce his first name properly, so if it's okay, I'm going to call you Jed. I hope that's okay. You don't mind me calling you Mr. Jed Crouch, but welcome, Jed. Welcome, Nazi B. My niece is online as well, so people are coming on. Welcome, as always. And please put your questions in the chat, and we will try and answer them. And please put your name if your name hasn't come up, because you've got to give StreamYard permission for them to use your name. But wow, so you got hi. Yeah, she goes, Jed is fine. Thanks, Jed. And we do want to get you on at some point, because I think he does some wonderful work, and he's got some experience in addiction himself, both personally and in other ways. But Jeremy, it's great because one thing that I've learned in recovery is working in communion, working as a collective, working together, because whichever modality you follow, I think the one thing is that you can't really do it on your own. Mm-hmm. I'm a strong believer of that. Mm-hmm. Maybe you might have a bit of success in the beginning, which I thought I did, but at some point there is a risk that you may go back to square one, or you may go back to whatever. So I think working communion, working as a collective, working together, working with support is massive. And not only actually going to different modalities like conscious recovery or whatever it may be, but people who are actually presenting this, who are actually teaching this, like yourself and TJ, working together with the same passion is important as well. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the same goal and the same vision, for example, as a person you're working with in recovery, if you're not aligned, if you weren't aligned with TJ, it may not be working as well as it is working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think my initial attraction to recovery as a whole was the fellowship and community. And in my own addiction, I was out on an island, and I felt, even when I was in a room with 10 people, I never felt so alone. And so when I first got into recovery, I really latched on to the sense of fellowship and community. And I think my attraction to conscious recovery was, I was at a point in my career where I felt effective as a counselor. I felt effective in my marketing efforts and as a person in recovery advocating for recovery. But there was this sense that something was missing, and that something was spiritual connection. And so while I was with other people and supporting other people in their growth, I kept thinking there's something else a little bit deeper than this. And that was really what blew my mind about conscious recovery, was that TJ named it as one of the root causes of addiction, spiritual disconnection. And when I read about that, I was just so enamored by the thought of, wow, like this is the path to a deep and meaningful connection with myself. What will that create if I do that with me? What will that create with the people I'm with and the people I'm around? And what I discovered was, the more I fostered that spiritual relationship in me, the easier it was for me to be available and hold space for people around me. And when we speak to our partnered programs, and when we go to trainings with clinicians and even clients that just read the book, when we're able to be with them, you can feel it. You can feel the energy, and it's just absolutely incredible. And I think that is, for me, kind of that next step of fellowship and community, is fostering a deep and meaningful spiritual connection with people.
Wow, I love that, Jeremy, because it's true that, as Saf was talking, then of course, as you were talking, I was sitting with that root cause of spiritual disconnection and how paradoxical it is, because, Saf, you said it so beautifully, we can't do it alone. So there's this interesting paradox for me that if I try to do it. So the answers are within me. The answers are within each and every one of us. But my experience shows me that we also need community. And as Jeremy said, I found myself looking outside of myself for connection. And it was really important, especially early in recovery, because I was so disconnected internally. I was one of those people that I take away the drugs and the alcohol, and I was on this high for a while, like this natural high of, oh my gosh, I'm no longer hungover. I'm no longer staying awake for 3 days in a row. I'm eating again. I'm going to work. I was in this bliss, but that bliss period had a little bit of a shelf life. And then as I started to recognize that the underlying root issues were still there, I started trying to find communities, and I found that through 12-step, and I found that through spiritual community, and it was awesome, and it was wonderful. And I realized, as Jeremy said, there was a deepening that was going to need to happen for me, and that was I needed to reconnect with my true nature, my essential self. And for whatever reason, early in recovery, that was really scary for me. And, what I know now is it's because I had abandoned that so early in my life that it was scary for me to imagine returning to my true nature. And, at that time, I had a very different concept of spirituality. I thought it was about finding a higher power outside of myself, and that it was about connecting with spiritual community. All of that is true. And then there was this deeper awareness of, true spirituality for me, and this is only for me, it's about reconnecting with my true nature, the way I came into the world. And so that became foundational in conscious recovery, because I do think that some of the modalities, maybe a bit unconsciously, offer tools to people that are still strategies to connect outside of ourselves. It's awesome and it's wonderful. And then there's this point where it's, I also need to reconnect with my true nature. And then my community becomes so much more rich, because I'm not looking at them to try to heal myself. I'm looking at how I'm in the process of healing and then sharing that. And that's a totally different way of being in the world.
Got a few messages here. Hi, Saf. Hi, TJ. Kimberly says, I'm so thankful for Tuesdays and having this opportunity to get help. Tell us more, Kimberly, and what if you're struggling, let us know. Jed says, experience is the best teacher. Very good. I did say something earlier as well, which I've lost. Nicole says, amazing. Lovely to see you guys. Clear attachments by the root and fill the gap with unconditional love. Learn to love our energy and feel our energy. I know how it feels as an outsider. Realize we are not alone. It's okay to ask for help. And obviously, Angel is so beautiful when she starts putting. I'm happy to hear that. Always love you to connect. Yes, it's great help in diving deep. Oh yes, I'm tuning in myself, my deep inner happiness. I'm gonna maybe say something a bit controversial here.
I noticed when Sat pauses this way, that's what he's about to do. Well, let's controversial.
I've been thinking about this, TJ. Right? It's and it is. There's a particular step in the 12 steps where they say about removing defects of character. And it's quite a funny. I went through the 12 steps myself, and thankfully it really worked for me. That's the first thing I want to say. At that time, it was what I needed, and I also thought I started to remove all these defects of character. As I've gone further down the line in recovery, and this is probably a question to you, Jeremy. As I've gone further down the line in recovery, I feel that even at the time it worked, now I don't want to remove them. Now I want to acknowledge them. I don't want to run away from them. I want to know why I had these defects. And I'm asking all these questions. And I'm thinking, even though on one hand, I think it helped me at that time, but now I want to address these defects. Where's your understanding in this? What's your thought?
I love that. And TJ speaks so often to the power and importance of language. And And so I'll let TJ share his perspective on that, because it's really profound. And but for me, when I think about just the term character defects, there's just saying it out loud, it kind of activates this sense of shame. And like, something's wrong with me. I wish I was more like that other person, or if only I didn't feel or think or act this way, then I would be worthy, better, able. And so for me, when I spoke to fostering that spiritual connection with myself, what started me on that path was, I'm sitting down with TJ Woodward for the first time ever. And at some point in the conversation, he looks at me and says, "You're a whole and perfect spiritual being, just the way you are." And I remember resisting that, purely from ego. I went into the entire story about how wrong that is, that I'm not whole and perfect because I have these defects, right? And the more I connected with who I am, the more I realized that it's who I am is who I am, and who I am internally, my essential nature, is absolutely perfect, just the way it is. And I've used strategies in the past to be able to deal with less than pleasant emotions or difficult situations. And when I took a different perspective and looked at that from the outside, not from a place of guilt or shame, what I realized is, wow, like, Jeremy's inner child is just doing his very best to navigate this very complex world with complex emotions and powerful situation. And that deserves a little bit of credit. And so that's how I started to heal these wounds that would lend me the ideas, the core false beliefs that in some ways I'm less than or broken. And what was interesting is that as soon as I started to acknowledge my perfection, my inherent wholeness, I started to operate better in the world anyway. And so when we throw around words like character defect, what does that then create energetically? What does that manifest in the world? And when I started to really challenge that, I noticed that the less I believed my own core false beliefs, the more effective I was anyway. And so, TJ, did you want to speak to that too?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Jeremy. That was beautifully said. And, language is powerful. And the deeper awareness is, it's not only the words, it's the energy. Angel talked about energy. Jeremy talked about energy. There's a frequency. Language has frequency. And it's a doorway into how I'm being with myself in the world. And I also just absolutely love 12 steps. For me, it was a very, very important path. And I remember one of my early sponsors said something that I thought was simple and profound. He said, "If you get in a car accident, don't call me, call 911. And what he meant by that was powerful, because let me tell you, in 1986, when I got sober, the prevailing consciousness was 12 steps was the only way. And if you don't work the steps in the way that I tell you to work the steps, you're probably going to go out there and die. It was hardcore, right? And so for him to say, there are other possibilities here. In other words, a paramedic is going to be a lot more useful than a sponsor if I am, in a car accident. So then I started sitting with, oh, wow, it's a path. It's not the only path. And the people that I know that have long-term sobriety in 12-step, maybe they still love going to 12-step meetings and they're exploring other avenues, right? So I felt that it was important to say that, because it's my journey, and it's almost everyone I know in recovery. We choose some different paths as we move along. So yes, the power of language is so important. And I remember, Saf, like you said, it was probably really useful for me in the beginning to look at the ways I was acting in the world, what was defective about that. But my gosh, did it create a sense of brokenness within me. I was going into shame, and I was going into the wrongness of me, and going into, I can't believe I keep doing this. See, it is true, I'm broken. And then as my path got deeper, I recognized that 100% of the time that I acted in what my ego mind would call defective, 100% of the time, it was because I forgot who I really am. and who I really am is a whole and perfect being, just like everybody else in the world. And so as I recognized, as Jeremy said so perfectly, as when I disconnected from that, I had all these things that seemed to be defective. And all I was doing was trying to manage, as Jeremy already said, those wounds, that belief in my brokenness. And so isn't it interesting that if it's true that shame is one of the root causes of addiction, certainly true in my life, and we say that in conscious recovery, then adding the next step of like, oh, let's look at all the ways I'm defective, all that is concretizing the shame. It has usefulness, and I think it really, for me, had a very short shelf life because I started believing I was defective, and that was the prevailing consciousness. It's true, you need to be a better human being in order to be worthy. Whew. And then I started, at some point, changing the language to superpower, right? It's my superpower. The late great Dr. Wayne Dyer said character defects are only assets with the volume turned up too high. I love that. So it's not about removing them. It's about balancing them. It's about looking at in what ways is it useful, in what ways is it not useful.
It's and obviously in conscious recovery, thank you for that, guys. Obviously in conscious recovery, because I feel like part of it now, we don't say coping strategies, right? Coping mechanism. We say brilliant strategy,
right?
Rather than saying coping, rather than saying character defects, could we call it character strategies?
I call it superpowers, right? Because it's when I work with clients, let's put it that way, and I don't work directly with clients anymore, but when I did, when I framed this as like, what would it be like for you? One of my favorite things to say, what would it be like for you to look at it as a superpower? And some of them would look at me in a very perplexed way, like, what are you talking about? Stealing is not a superpower, right? Or they would say, cheating on my spouse is not a superpower, right? So we started looking at what we might call defects as a superpower, and then started asking the question, where's the volume turned up on this, right? Where is it? Where's that adjustment? And that became something that I would see not only their eyes light up with this idea, but there was not shame. And the interesting thing is I found that we could have more accountability if we took away the shame, not less, right? So if I believe I am defective, I am broken, there's something wrong with me, I can't believe I did that, I need to go back and make amends and tell them what a terrible person I am, I couldn't break the pattern. I found myself repeating it. I would make an amend and feel worse. Making amends is an important spiritual practice, but if we're working with shame, it might actually make the shame worse. So when I started to say, wow, what if I'm a whole and perfect being? And when I forgot that, I had all this absurd behavior that harmed myself and others. So really, it wasn't about not being accountable, because some people say, so you're saying that we don't have to be accountable for our behavior. Believe me, I've had to be accountable for my behavior in all sorts of ways. But I'm not my behavior essentially. And there's something really important there.
Yeah. And if I could just add something to that, one of the character defects that I had labeled myself with and been labeled by others for a huge portion of my life was laziness. And so for the longest time, I was stuck in this belief that I was inherently lazy. And so when I had a day where my production was high, I would feel really good. And then on days where, where it wasn't, I would go into shame and say, God, I'm just so lazy. And one of the things that I've come to through conscious recovery and this recognition in my inherent wholeness is the whole concept of laziness to me kind of lost all of its credibility, because laziness it doesn't mean anything, right? And when I took a really deep look at that, what I recognized was if I was being lazy, what was really happening is whatever I had to do, whatever I perceived that I had to do that I wasn't doing, was touching a wound. There was something being activated that was resisting me, putting out effort into the world. And so, for example, I would always when I was a counselor doing my notes. I would just dread doing my notes. And I would go into this story about how lazy I am. Like, God, I'm so lazy. I can't even do my notes. And I only have 12 this week. Like, what the heck? And what I realized is that when we had done our onboarding for the notes platform, I didn't understand a lot of it. And I didn't want to ask because I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. And so when I recognized, like, wow, every time I go to my notes, it's tapping this wound that I'm not smart, that I'm stupid. So when I said, okay, well, that's not true. I am smart. I'm not stupid. And I cleared up my misunderstandings with the platform itself. All of a sudden, I'm no longer lazy, and notes were no longer a problem. And so I think when we look at character defects, like TJ said, if we go into agreement with that's who I am, that's how I am in the world, it just perpetuates more of that, because that's the frequency from which we're vibrating. But as soon as we can reconnect with our essential nature, that doesn't happen anymore. And I think that's the real power behind the importance of spiritual connection in recovery. So
we're not saying that these defects are right. The behavior is right. We're not saying it's right. But what we're saying is that the more we tell ourselves, or the more we're told something, I think there's a sense of comfortability for us. In a bizarre kind. If someone says you're X, Y, and Z, and they say it often enough, one, you believe you are, and two, you actually, you know what? I'll stay there. I've got a few more messages. Jed is of the Angel. I'm learning about not giving my power away so freely. Respect myself. Jed has said something quite nicely, because I keep what I have by giving it away. Definitely a 12-step sentence there. Reaching out to the still suffering addict is what puts a smile on my face today. An Angel says, going through this now, diving deep. Sometimes stuff happens for us too more easy. Let's go. Let go. We wake up and move on. So there's so back to the character defects. It's about acknowledging that you did X, Y, and Z, but not accepting that not agreeing that it was right, because as you said, we don't agree that selfish behaviors or cheating on someone or this, that, and the other was a right thing to do, but we can't beat out. It's about not beating yourself up about it, right? It's like when I went to 12-step fellowship, and I still go sometimes. I'm still inclined to say, "Hi, Saf, I'm an addict. Hi, Saf, I'm an alcoholic." I believe I no longer am.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Jeremy spoke to this. The power of language is so important, and in the New Thought world, we are very clear on what we attach our I am to is what we create in the world. I am broken. I am effervescent. I am an infinite being. I am unharmable. That's the new movement that Jeremy and I have recently created.
I've seen it. I've seen the T-shirts. I want a free T-shirt, guys. Come on.
Free?
I don't want a PDF T-shirt.
Now we can do, printing, right? So you can print yourself one. No, we'll get you a T-shirt, Saf, for sure. And that power of I am is important because it does create a frequency, right? So when I first started in New Thought, I thought it was magic, which in some ways it is, right? Because I didn't realize I was walking around with the narrative of I am broken, I am damaged, I am, not worthy, all of those. It was a constant inner dialogue, and I wasn't really aware of it. But the important piece here is once I became aware of it, I actually thought it was useful still. Well, if I don't acknowledge what's wrong with me, how can I change it? Well, the opposite of that is true. And I learned that in a profound way when I was really involved in my nephew's life in his very early years. He lived with me for a while when he was in the toddler stage, all kinds of adventures with that. But I would realize that when he was having an intense emotional experience, if I would get down on his level and just sit on the floor with him and be present, just be present with him, he would relax. And it was so powerful because that was not the way I was parented. I was parented like, stop crying, take this, go to your room. I'm going to give you something to cry about. And I'm not blaming my parents. That was definitely just the way people did, back in that era. But what I recognized is presence and compassion are actually greater change agents than criticism. That's, to me, the power of it. Angel talked about not giving her power away, pulling back in and recognizing that the power of presence with myself, compassion for, Jeremy talked about the wound getting touched. A lot of us have a negative connotation with the wound getting touched. And when I realized it's getting touched because it's wanting to heal, wow, total paradigm shift. I would start saying, oh, thank you. You just touched a place that's unhealed. Thank you. You really helped me. I remember doing the presence process years ago and really diving into that. And it starts with gratitude for the delivery, gratitude for what I perceive to be the unkind word. It's not what someone's saying. It's that a wound is getting touched. And it's not getting touched because something's wrong. It's getting touched because it's an opportunity to move into healing. And once I recognized that, I started not exactly seeking difficult situations, but welcoming them when they were arising. Because I was living my life from the outside in, and I thought, well, I need more healthy relationships. I need better people in my life. I need a better working situation. Our current paradigm is like, I need to remove toxic relationships. And I am being a little sarcastic with that, because if I believe I'm broken, I will unconsciously seek that in the world, but only 100% of the time. So the healing comes from within. And as I heal the wounds, I start to, oh, wow, there are more loving people in my life. It's because I've become more loving. And ultimately, it's because I have not only allowed myself to feel those wounds, but I've recognized the benefit of them being healed by the difficult situations.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question for both of you then. If one was to apply the conscious recovery modality, can they still apply it and still stay in their present environment?
Jeremy, I'll let you take that one.
All right, gladly. Yeah. So I'm really glad you asked that, Saf, because there can be a perception that conscious recovery is an alternative to other treatment modalities, whether it's refuge recovery or the 12 steps or whatever it may be. And the intention has always been that if somebody resonates with conscious recovery and that's what they want to use to get sober and live a life in recovery, that's perfect. If somebody is in the 12 steps, working the steps, and they want to layer on conscious recovery to enhance their work in the 12 steps, that is also perfect. And so the way I've always viewed conscious recovery is it's not a replacement necessarily. And in my experience, what we've seen is we briefly did conscious recovery meetings, much like a 12-step meeting, but with conscious recovery. And what we found, interestingly enough, was that I thought it was going to be a lot of people very newly sober. And what it actually ended up being was a lot of our colleagues and professionals in the field who had 15 years sober through the 12 steps, and they wanted to dive in a little deeper through a spiritual perspective. So to answer your question, Saf, it's something that can be used as a resource, no matter what program is being worked, no matter what step you're on. And my belief is that if anything, because I still have a lot of love for the 12 steps, and there's no contention between TJ, myself, conscious recovery, and other treatment models. We offer it as a support. So I've seen it where people are working mindfulness-based programs, and conscious recovery supports that. I've seen people work in 12 steps, and it supports that. It's a way to, no matter what step you're on or where you're at in recovery, to address the roots underneath the soil. And so that's what I would say to that. TJ, you want to add anything?
No, that's perfect. That's absolutely right. I mean, we want to be clear, because a lot of people think conscious recovery is an alternative and it's a support group. And at this point, it's not. Maybe it will turn into that at some point where there'll be meetings like we did during, I'll say early COVID, when most of us were sheltering in place. What it is it's a modality to help someone deepen their recovery regardless of their path. And our focus primarily right now is through treatment programs, because that is a place where, of course, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people start their recovery journey, or they go back to, either relapse or deepen, or, that's really where people are at their most vulnerable and really need a lot of help. So that's why we focus a lot on treatment programs. We also have online resources, a book and a workbook. So we are in no way against anything, always for how can we contribute to, how can we add to. And I think the number one audience at this point for conscious recovery, yeah, I think I can say that, is other than the people in treatment, newly in recovery that love it, people that have about 2 years sober. They're loving it, because I know when I was 2 years sober, I reached a really dark place. The pink cloud, as we call it sometimes, had worn off. I realized the underlying root causes, but didn't really know what to do with them yet. I was afraid to look at it. I was afraid to heal my trauma. And there was a consciousness at the time that said, all you have to do is not drink and you've had a successful day. And I'm like, well, okay, that's great, but why do I actually feel a little suicidal at 2 years sober? And then I went into judgment about that, because what I heard everyone saying is, my life is better than it's ever been. My worst day in sobriety is better than my best day drinking. And I'm like, I'm literally feeling darker than I did in my addiction. And no one's really talking about that. And so I met people that were like, it's okay. Let's look at how we start to heal the underlying root causes. And what I realized very quickly is, I was saying that in early recovery, you don't need to do anything but work the steps and stay sober. Don't worry about all of that. Well, I was saying that because I hadn't healed my own, right? So I found some people in long-term recovery, especially Mary Helen Brownell, who was my really most major early teacher. And she said, no, this is about healing all of the ways that we have separated from the truth of who and what we are. Mind blown.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to read what Jed has written. And I think in early recovery, I've got to tend to agree. He's saying it's hard to heal in the same place you got sick. Never say never, but it sure would be easier. Because for me, when I came in, I could have done any modality if I was still living that same life and still had the same people around me. And I guess I needed a modality. I needed something to get me going. And now, would I be able to go in that environment? Possibly. Would I want to? No. It's different things. But wow, this has been Jeremy. Thank you so much for being with us today. And maybe I might see you next week, but we'll talk about it. Be great to have you. So Angel saying work on the heart and mind together. 12 steps. She's saying something very nice to Kimberly, and she's saying the word motivation. TJ, the last words with you, please. But Jeremy, thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully I'll see you next week. But I guess we'll chat about that off air. TJ, over to you, sir.
I just want to close with gratitude. I think about Debbie Garcia, who, started Spirituality Gone Wild, and, her favorite conversation is gratitude. And I'm just feeling into the frequency of gratitude for you, Saf, for you, Jeremy, for everyone that watches us and offers the incredible comments. And, I like to close with the same thing. And that is, if no one has told you today, you are a whole and perfect spiritual being.
Beautiful. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for watching.